In the dim glow of a penthouse chandelier, Alexander Hale stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan skyline empire, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the cold certainty of betrayal's shadow. He was 35, a self-made tech mogul whose algorithms predicted market crashes before they whispered, yet tonight, as rain lashed against the glass like accusations, he wheeled himself toward the bedroom where his fiancée, Victoria, lay oblivious in silk sheets that cost more than most people's homes. For 6 months, he had planned this charade, faking a spinal injury in a car accident, staged with the precision of his boardroom deals, to unmask her heart. Would she stay for love, or flee from the wreckage of his fortune? As he paused at the door, heart pounding like a war drum, he whispered to the empty air that this test would either bind her to him forever or shatter the illusion he had built around his lonely soul. If you believe in the quiet power of kindness and the beauty of second chances, hit that like button, drop a comment below sharing your own story of unexpected grace, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that love sees beyond the surface, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more tales that warm the heart and heal the spirit. We're building a community here, one heartfelt moment at a time. Alexander's life had always been a symphony of calculated risks, from dropping out of Stanford to launch his AI startup at 22, turning it into a billion-dollar behemoth that whispered fortunes into the ears of Wall Street titans. But beneath the tailored suits and private jets lurked a boy from a Rust Belt town, orphaned young and raised by a grandmother whose only wealth was her unyielding faith in people's goodness. That faith had eroded over the years, chipped away by gold-digging exes and fair-weather friends who vanished when the champagne ran dry. Victoria Langford entered his world like a summer storm, elegant, ambitious, with raven hair that cascaded like midnight and eyes that sparkled with the promise of partnership in his glittering chaos. They met at a gala for emerging artists, her laughter cutting through the din like a lifeline, and within weeks, she had moved into his sprawling Tribeca loft, her designer heels clicking against marble floors that echoed his growing doubts. She spoke of dreams they would chase together, charity foundations, European escapes, a family etched in legacy, but Alexander, scarred by too many close calls, wondered if her affection was woven from the threads of his success or something deeper, more fragile. The idea crystallized one sleepless night after overhearing her on the phone, complaining to a friend about the drama of his high-stakes life. Was it a slip, or a sign? He consulted no one, not even his loyal assistant, Marcus, who had become more brother than employee over a decade of shared battles. Instead, he hired a discreet medical team, actors in white coats, to orchestrate the accident, complete with falsified scans and a wheelchair that became his prison and his probe. The world mourned his tragedy in headlines, tech visionary paralyzed in crash, Hale's empire in limbo. Victoria wept publicly, her tears captured in viral clips that painted her as the devoted fiancée, but Alexander watched from his shadowed bed, hungering for the truth in her unguarded moments. The first weeks of his feigned paralysis were a descent into a hell of his own making, the loft transforming from a sanctuary of sleek minimalism, glass walls framing the Hudson's restless flow, abstract sculptures whispering of untamed ambition, into a sterile cage of medical monitors and half-eaten trays. Victoria fluttered in and out like a butterfly caught in a gale. Her visits punctured by urgent calls from her publicist and fittings for the inspirational photoshoot she pitched to Vogue. She would perch on the edge of his bed, her manicured hand stroking his forehead with a tenderness that felt rehearsed, murmuring about how they would overcome this, how his lawyers were already circling like sharks to sue the phantom driver. But as days blurred into a monotonous haze of therapy sessions he endured with gritted teeth, her absences grew longer, excuses piling like autumn leaves, board meetings for her fledgling fashion line, brunches with influencers who could keep his name alive. Alexander's body, still strong beneath the charade, ached not from immobility but from the hollow echo in her voice, the way her eyes darted to her phone more than to his face. He longed to shout, to shatter the lie and demand her fire, but the test demanded silence, a vigil that gnawed at his resolve. Nights were the worst, when the city lights mocked him through the windows, and he replayed their early days, the stolen kisses in Central Park under cherry blossoms, her head on his chest as she confessed fears of fading into obscurity. Was it all a performance? Doubt coiled in his gut like smoke, threatening to choke the man who had once bent the world to his will. To fill the void, he expanded his household staff, interviewing candidates from a discreet agency, seeking not pity but normalcy. That's when Elena Ramirez appeared, a 32-year-old widow from Queens with calloused hands and eyes like polished obsidian, holding the weight of quiet resilience in her slight frame. Elena had crossed oceans before crossing thresholds. Born in a dusty village outside Mexico City, she had fled cartel shadows at 18, smuggling herself north with dreams of stability for the son she left with her abuela. America had been a grind of diner shifts and night classes in nursing, her English sharpening like a blade against the whetstone of necessity. Marriage to Carlos, a gentle mechanic with a laugh that filled rooms, brought fleeting joy and a daughter, Sophia, whose giggles were the sun in their cramped Brooklyn walk-up. But cancer stole him 3 years ago, leaving Elena to bury not just her husband but the fragile future they had stitched together, her nights now haunted by the echo of his tools clinking in silence. She took the Hale job on a whim, the agency's promise of live-in care for a high-profile invalid, a lifeline amid mounting bills and Sophia's braces. Walking into the loft that first afternoon, she felt like an intruder in a museum, air thick with the scent of leather and loss, the air conditioning humming a sterile lullaby. Alexander, propped in his chair by the window, struck her as a fallen king, sharp jaw shadowed by stubble, blue eyes stormy with unspoken storms, his broad shoulders slumped under a cashmere throw. She didn't curtsy or gush, instead, she set down her worn tote bag, rolled up her sleeves to reveal faded tattoos of roses and anchors, a nod to her grandmother's garden and her father's seafaring tales, and asked simply if he'd like the room aired out, her voice carrying the warm lilt of her homeland, unpolished and unafraid. In that moment, as sunlight fractured through the blinds like hesitant hope, Alexander felt seen not as the billionaire in repose, but as a man adrift, and for the first time in weeks, the weight on his chest lightened just a fraction. Their days wove into a rhythm as subtle as the tide, Elena's presence a balm against the charade's sharpening edges. She started small, wheeling him to the terrace where the river bent like a silver question mark, brewing chamomile tea strong enough to chase shadows, her stories spilling out unbidden as she fluffed his pillows or adjusted the blinds to catch the morning's gold. She spoke of Sophia's obsession with drawing fantastical beasts, how the girl would sketch dragons on napkins during dinner, dreaming of a world where heroes didn't need capes but kindness. Alexander listened, at first out of politeness, his responses clipped to maintain the facade of despair, but her words were threads pulling at the knots in his soul. Victoria's visits became footnotes in the narrative Elena was unwittingly scripting, the fiancé sweeping in with armfuls of get-well baskets from Rodeo Drive, her perfume cloying as overripe fruit, only to depart with promises deferred by just one more meeting. One evening, as thunder rumbled like a distant regret, Victoria lingered longer than usual, her fingers tracing Alexander's arm with a possessiveness that now rang false. Elena, polishing silver in the corner, caught the flicker in his eyes, the plea for authenticity amid the artifice, and excused herself quietly, but not before Alexander glimpsed the quiet judgment in her glance, a mirror to his own growing disillusionment. That night, alone with the storm's fury, he confessed fragments to his journal, the leather-bound tome hidden under his mattress. She builds empires of image, while Elena mends the fractures with hands that have held death and still choose life. What am I testing, if not my own blindness? The struggle deepened, his body a betrayer that yearned to rise and embrace the truth, but the test anchored him, each day a tighter knot between deception and desire. As autumn painted the city in russets and golds, the challenges Alexander faced morphed from physical feint to an emotional maelstrom, his heart a battlefield where loyalty warred with awakening. Therapy sessions, staged with Marcus feeding lines through an earpiece, became ordeals of restraint. He wanted to stand, to pace the loft's expanse and roar his frustrations, but Elena's gentle encouragements, El cuerpo recuerda, señor, even when the mind forgets, kept him seated, her faith in his phantom recovery a spark against his self-inflicted isolation. She introduced rituals that chipped at his armor, reading aloud from dog-eared copies of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, her voice weaving magic realism into the sterile air, tales of love that bloomed in the unlikeliest soils. One crisp afternoon, she wheeled him to the rooftop garden, a forgotten oasis of ferns and fire pits, where she knelt to plant bulbs in the earth, her knees dirt-streaked like a painter's palette. "These will surprise you in spring," she said, patting the soil with care, hidden now, but fierce when they break through. Alexander watched her, the wind tousling her dark curls, and felt a pang sharper than any boardroom loss, the realization that Victoria's love demanded spotlights, while Elena's bloomed in shadows. Suspense coiled tighter when Victoria announced a gala in his honor, a tribute to resilience, her eyes alight with the optics of it all. Rehearsals filled the loft with florists and photographers, Victoria directing like a conductor lost in her score, but Alexander's gaze drifted to Elena, who scrubbed floors in the periphery, her quiet dignity a rebuke to the frenzy. That night, as confetti mock-ups littered the floor, Victoria curled against him, whispering of their future post-recovery, yachts in Monaco, a wedding splashed across tabloids, but her words landed like ash, devoid of the warmth Elena kindled with a simple bowl of pozole, steam rising like prayers, shared over stories of Carlos's stubborn refusal to let illness dim his humor. The turning point came unannounced, a fracture in the facade that reshaped everything. It was a February gale, the kind that howls through canyons of steel and glass, trapping Alexander in a nightmare of vulnerability when a power outage plunged the loft into inky void. Monitors beeped erratically, the backup generator stuttering like a dying breath, and panic clawed at him, not for his safety, but for the unraveling lie. Victoria was in Paris for Fashion Week, her texts a flurry of emojis and, "Miss you, babe, back soon with couture for your big reveal." Elena, sensing the shift from her room down the hall, emerged with a flashlight and calm as a lighthouse, her silhouette a beacon in the chaos. She navigated the darkness with instinct, checking fuses, brewing tea over a camp stove scavenged from her emergency kit, a relic from hurricane seasons in her youth. As winds battered the windows, they sat by the fire pit she had coaxed to life with scavenged logs, the flames dancing shadows across her face etched with lines of quiet sorrow. In that cocoon of flicker and fury, barriers crumbled. Alexander, voice raw from disuse, admitted fragments, not the full deception, but the ache of feeling unseen, the fear that wealth armored him from truth. Elena listened without pity, her hand resting lightly on his knee, sharing how loss had taught her that love isn't a transaction but a tether, fragile yet unbreakable. "Mi amor," she murmured, eyes glistening with memories of Carlos's last days. "He couldn't walk at the end, but he danced in my heart every step." Tears traced Alexander's cheeks, hot and unbidden, the first real release since the charade began, and in that vulnerability, something ignited, a spark that warmed deeper than the fire, a recognition that her strength mirrored his own buried resilience. Dawn broke with the storm's retreat, sunlight spilling like forgiveness, and as Elena helped him back to bed, their fingers brushed in a moment suspended, electric with unspoken possibility. From then on, the air hummed with undercurrents, stolen glances over breakfast trays, her laughter a melody when Sophia visited on weekends, the 7-year-old's crayons scattering across his lap as she declared him her brave knight in a chair. Alexander's struggles intensified, the test now a torment, every tender exchange with Elena amplified Victoria's growing distance, her calls laced with impatience about his moping, oblivious to the man awakening beneath the mask. Suspense crested like a wave held at its peak through spring's tentative thaw, the city awakening in tandem with Alexander's conflicted heart. The gala loomed, a glittering guillotine, Victoria's preparations a whirlwind that left him breathless, fittings for his wheelchair-adapted tuxedo, speeches ghostwritten by PR firms promising his triumphant return. Elena, ever the steady current, wove through it all, her presence a sanctuary. She taught him card games from her childhood, rummy hands slapped on a trade table amid bets of one more story, her tales of village festivals under starlit skies painting vivid escapes from his gilded cage. One rain-slicked evening, as thunder grumbled echoes of that fateful outage, Sophia clambered onto his lap during a visit, her small hands tracing the lines of his face with solemn curiosity. "Do you hurt inside, like Papa did?" she asked, her innocence a scalpel to his soul, and Elena, watching from the doorway, froze, her composure cracking just enough for Alexander to see the depth of her guarded grief. He pulled her into the circle that night, the three of them huddled with hot cocoa and Sophia's drawings, the loft alive with a warmth that mocked its opulence. Victoria returned from Paris laden with gowns and grievances, her embrace cool as marble, complaining of jet lag while scrolling gala RSVPs. The contrast gutted him. Where Elena mended with presence, Victoria planned escapes, her love a spotlight that blinded rather than illuminated. Doubts warred within him, reveal the truth now, risk Elena's trust shattered by his deceit, or press on, letting the test consume what remained of his integrity. Sleepless nights blurred into fevered resolve, his journal filling with feverish scrawls. "She sees the man, not the myth, but at what cost to her faith in me?" The emotional crescendo built inexorably, each interaction with Elena layering suspense like sediment. A shared sunset from the terrace, her shoulder brushing his as she pointed out constellations named for lost loves. A quiet afternoon when she confessed her dreams of opening a community center for immigrant families, her voice trembling with the fire of purpose he had long ago banked for profit. Alexander's challenges peaked in isolation's grip, the charade a noose tightening around his throat, yet in her orbit, he glimpsed redemption, a love untainted by ledgers, rooted in the raw soil of shared humanity. The unraveling arrived not with fanfare but a whisper, on the eve of the gala, when fate conspired to strip away the last veils. Alexander, alone in the loft's vast quiet, Victoria at a final rehearsal, Elena tucking Sophia in after a sleepover, decided to end it. He rose from the wheelchair in the privacy of his bathroom, legs unsteady from atrophy of pretense, muscles screaming in protest after months of betrayal. The mirror reflected a stranger, eyes hollowed by hunger for truth, face gaunt with the weight of secrets. He emerged into the living room, pacing like a caged wolf, when the door clicked open. Elena, returning from a bodega run for Sophia's favorite mangoes, her arms laden with bags that tumbled to the floor in a cascade of fruit and shock. She stood frozen, gaze traveling from the discarded chair to his standing form, betrayal dawning like a bruise across her features. "Senor." "Alex," she breathed, the nickname she had shyly adopted slipping out like a wound, her hands clutching the doorframe as if to anchor against the tide of hurt. He poured it out then, the full torrent, the accident's forgery, the test born of fear, Victoria's unwitting role in his paranoia, words tumbling in a rush that left him raw, exposed, begging for understanding even as he braced for her scorn. Elena's face crumpled, tears carving paths through the day's weariness, not just for the lie but for the vulnerability she had bared to a phantom. "You let me grieve with you, laugh with you, as if it was real," she whispered, voice fracturing like glass underfoot, turning away to gather the spilled mangoes with shaking hands, each piece a symbol of the trust now bruised. Alexander reached for her, his touch tentative, and in that electric silence, the gala's distant hum faded to irrelevance. This was the true reckoning, the heart's unscripted drama. What followed was a odyssey of atonement, the gala transforming from celebration to catalyst in ways neither could foresee. Alexander attended not as invalid but as himself, striding into the ballroom on legs that wobbled with redemption's weight, the crowd's gasp a symphony of surprise. Victoria, radiant in emerald silk at the podium, faltered mid-speech, her smile cracking like porcelain as realization dawned. His cure a miracle too convenient, the test's cruel geometry snapping into focus. She confronted him in an alcove of velvet drapes and crystal flutes, her voice a hiss of fury, demands for explanations, accusations of sabotage to her loyalty narrative, her eyes narrowing not with pain but calculation, tallying the PR fallout against their shared empire. Alexander watched her unravel, the woman he had idolized reduced to a silhouette of self-interest, and in that severance, freedom bloomed bitter and bright. He slipped away amid the murmurs, hailing a cab to the loft where Elena waited, Sophia asleep in the guest room, the air thick with the scent of cooling pozole and unresolved ache. She met him at the door, arms crossed like shields, but her eyes, those obsidian depths, held not ice but embers of the connection they had forged. He knelt then, not in feigned weakness but genuine supplication, confessing not just the deceit but the man it unearthed. A boy afraid of abandonment, a mogul hollowed by success, a soul revived by her unyielding light. Elena's resolve wavered, tears mingling with a tentative touch to his cheek, her whisper a bridge across the chasm. "Trust is a seed, Alex, not a storm. It grows slow, but once rooted, it weathers all." In the hours that stretched toward dawn, they talked through the ruins, her fears of being just another chapter in his ledger, his vow to dismantle the walls wealth had built, starting with anonymous donations to the very community centers she dreamed of. Sophia stirred once, patting out in footy pajamas to curl between them on the sofa.